You ever build something small and beautiful out of ashes just to watch someone try and bulldoze it for a better parking spot? I have. And let me tell you, it's never about the noise. It's always about the power. This story starts on a perfect autumn evening. The air was crisp, carrying the scent of pine and the smoky crackle of the fire pit in my backyard. A handful of neighbors were scattered in lawn chairs, wrapped in blankets, listening. Not to a stereo, not to a Bluetooth speaker, but to a live-string duet. A young woman on cello, a man a bit older on violin. Their music was a quiet river flowing through the darkness, lit only by the warm glow of string lights I'd hung between the old oak trees. This wasn't a party. It was a vigil. A quiet thank you to my best friend Leo, who we lost a year ago. He'd poured his life into a little music cafe downtown, a place where artists like these could play for a room full of people who actually listened. Then someone made a false complaint. A bureaucratic nightmare followed, and the place was shuttered. Leo's heart just gave out a few months later. So, once a month, I'd invite a few musicians over, gather some friends who missed him, and we'd fill the silence with the one thing that truly mattered to him. This happened to me, and if you're watching Karenology, you know it's never just a misunderstanding. The final note of a Bach piece was still hanging in the air, delicate as a spider's thread, when the night was ripped apart. A sudden blinding glare blasted the yard, turning our peaceful sanctuary into an interrogation scene. 2 security guards, guys built like refrigerators in ill-fitting uniforms, marched through my side gate, and between them, like a queen returning to her conquered land, was Karen Davis. Karen was the president of our homeowners association, a woman in her late 40s with perfectly styled blonde hair, a floral print dress that was a size too tight, and a smile that never, ever reached her cold blue eyes. She was a realtor, and she treated our neighborhood not like a community, but like her personal inventory. "This little gathering is over," she announced, her voice cutting through the stunned silence. I stood up, moving between her and the musicians. My heart was hammering a frantic, ugly rhythm against my ribs. "This is my property, Karen. These are my guests." She let out a little laugh, a sound like ice cubes clinking in an empty glass. "Not according to the bylaws." She held up a tablet, its screen a digital dagger pointed at my chest. On it was an official-looking document with the Homeowners Association letterhead. Article 7, Section 3, No Unsanctioned Commercial Events. You've been warned. Commercial? Karen, there's no money changing hands. This is a tribute to a friend. "It's a public performance, it draws traffic, and it's a nuisance," she snapped, scrolling down the screen. "And for this violation, you're being fined $5,000. $5,000? The number just hung there, obscene and unreal. My breath caught in my throat. Have you ever been hit with something so absurd you couldn't even form a word? That was me. Speechless. As I stared at the screen, my elbow bumped the small table next to me. My old analog sound meter, a heavy silver brick from the 70s, slid off the edge. It had belonged to Leo. It hit the stone patio with a sickening crack of glass and plastic. A piece of him, broken at her feet. I looked from the shattered meter to her face. I was expecting maybe a flicker of regret, an apology, something human. Instead, I saw a flicker of satisfaction. "Oops," she said, her voice dripping with fake sympathy. "Looks like you'll need a new one." She took a step closer, lowering her voice so only I could hear. The air around her smelled of ozone and cheap, cloying perfume. "This is just the beginning, Alex. I'm not just shutting down your music night." She paused, letting the threat settle in the cold night air. The security guards shifted their weight, their presence a silent, heavy promise of trouble. Karen raised her phone, the screen glowing in the dark as if to take a picture of my defeat. And for the first time that night, she smiled, a real, genuine smile. "I'm shutting you down." Her smile hung in the air long after she was gone, a toxic ghost. The silence her departure left behind was heavier than the music had ever been. My guests quietly packed up, offering sympathetic looks and mumbled apologies, but no one knew what to say. I didn't either. I just stood there on my patio, the broken pieces of Leo's sound meter glinting in the firelight like fallen stars. The official notice of the fine arrived the next day. $5,000, written in cold corporate font. It felt less like a penalty and more like a ransom note, That's when the second wave of the attack began. It wasn't a frontal assault with security guards. This was quieter, more insidious. Poison in the well. My phone started buzzing. It was the neighborhood social media group. Karen, or one of her lieutenants, had posted a heavily edited summary of the incident. I was no longer Alex, the quiet guy who kept to himself. I was a neighborhood nuisance, a lawbreaker, the selfish guy who hosts loud, disruptive parties. The comments underneath were a cesspool. People I'd known for years, people I'd shared a beer with, were piling on. He thinks the rules don't apply to him. My kids can't sleep. Property values are going to tank. It was a digital mob, and they were sharpening their pitchforks. Have you ever seen your own reputation get shredded online by people who barely know you? It feels like watching a stranger wear your face while committing a crime. The next morning, I went to get coffee at the local shop. The owner, a guy named Bill who usually greeted me with a joke, just gave me a tight, professional nod. He busied himself wiping down an already clean counter, avoiding my eyes. A couple at a nearby table stopped talking when I walked in, their whispers following me like a shadow. I felt a hot flush of anger and shame creep up my neck. I paid for my coffee and left without a word. The isolation was no longer digital. It was real, and it was suffocating. I knew I had to face them. The Homeowners Association had scheduled a special meeting. My case was the only thing on the agenda. Walking into that sterile community center room felt like walking into an ambush. The air was thick with the smell of stale coffee and self-righteousness. Every chair was taken. 24 pairs of eyes fixed on me, a mixture of hostility, curiosity, and fear. Karen sat at the head of the table, radiating smug authority. She didn't even look at me. She addressed the room. As you all know, we are here to discuss the multiple violations by Mr. Ramirez. This isn't just about one evening. This is a pattern of behavior that threatens the peace and quiet of our community. She had a stack of papers in front of her. I have here, she said, tapping the stack, formal complaints from 12 different households. She started reading them aloud. Vague accusations of excessive noise, parking congestion, late-night disturbances. It was all lies, twisted half-truths. My evenings ended by 10 p.m. Most guests walked from their own homes. The music was acoustic. I tried to speak. Karen, that's not true. Who are these complaints from? Let me talk to them. They wish to remain anonymous, she said, cutting me off with a wave of her hand. They fear retaliation. The room murmured in agreement. Fear retaliation? From me? The absurdity was staggering. She had them completely brainwashed. We will now vote on whether to uphold the $5,000 fine and issue a formal cease and desist order against any future gatherings on Mr. Ramirez's property. It was a landslide. I watched hand after hand go up against me. People I'd helped jumpstart their cars, people whose kids' fundraisers I'd donated to, all of them turning their backs. It was a public execution, and I was the guest of honor. After the vote, the room emptied out quickly, leaving me alone in the buzzing silence of the fluorescent lights. That night, I sat in my backyard. No fire, no music, no friends. Just me and the cold, empty chairs. I felt beaten, not just by the fine, but by the betrayal, the ease with which a community could be turned into a mob. I thought about packing it in, selling the house, leaving Leo's memory and this whole toxic mess behind. It would have been the easy thing to do. But then my eyes fell on the dark, silent corner where the musicians had played. I thought of Leo. He never backed down from a bully. He fought for his cafe, for his artists, until the very end. And I knew, with a certainty that settled deep in my bones, that letting Karen win would be a bigger betrayal than any I had suffered. She wanted silence. She wanted me to disappear. I picked up my phone. I didn't call a lawyer. I didn't post a rebuttal on the neighborhood page. I sent a single text to the cellist from that first night. Are you and the guys available next Saturday? That text message wasn't just a question. It was a declaration of war. A few minutes later, my phone buzzed. A single word from Maria, the cellist. Where? That was all I needed. That small spark of loyalty felt like a furnace in the cold emptiness of my backyard. Here's the thing about bullies like Karen. They expect you to run. They expect you to crumble. The one thing they can't handle is when you get back up and smile. So, I wasn't going to give her a fight she could use against me. I was going to give her a concert she couldn't complain about. I spent the week preparing. I bought heavy-duty sound-dampening blankets and hung them along the back fence. I spoke to my immediate neighbors, the ones who hadn't yet been fully poisoned by Karen's rhetoric, and assured them we'd be done by 9 p.m. I invited only a dozen people, the true believers. This time, it was going to be flawless, quiet, respectful, unimpeachable. I was playing her game by her rules, only I was going to play it better. What do you do when someone won't fight you fair and square? You build a fortress of reason and dare them to tear it down with their bare hands. Saturday night arrived, thick with tension. The air was colder now, smelling of damp leaves and impending winter. My small group of guests huddled closer to the fire pit, their faces etched with a mix of defiance and anxiety. They knew this was more than just music. Maria and the violinist Thomas took their places. They looked at me and nodded, a silent pact between us. Maria drew her bow across the cello, and the first note of a hauntingly beautiful sarabande filled the yard. It was quieter than before, more intimate. Every note was a small rebellion. For a few perfect minutes, we won. We carved out a piece of the night and filled it with grace. We were proving that beauty couldn't be outlawed. And then I heard it. A low, guttural thumping. It started faint, then grew louder. A beat-up sedan, the kind with mismatched body panels and a rattling muffler, rolled to a stop on the street right behind my property. The windows powered down, and a wall of sound slammed into us. It wasn't just music, it was a weapon. Distorted, bass-heavy hip-hop, cranked to a volume that made the leaves on the trees tremble. Thump, thump, thump. It was a rhythmic sledgehammer aimed at the heart of our fragile peace. Maria faltered, her bow scraping a sour note. Thomas closed his eyes, his jaw tight. They tried to play through it, their delicate melody fighting a losing battle against the sonic sludge. My guests winced, looking around in disbelief and horror. I saw her then. Across the street, standing under a streetlight, was Karen. She wasn't even trying to hide. She had her phone out, filming the whole ugly spectacle. She had a smirk on her face, the triumphant look of a general watching a perfectly executed ambush. She hadn't come to argue. She hadn't come to enforce a rule. She'd hired a couple of kids to do her dirty work, to create a scene of chaos and blame it on me. My blood turned to fire. Every instinct screamed at me to march over there, to rip that phone out of her hand. But I knew that was the trap. One aggressive move from me, caught on her camera, and I'd be finished. I'd be the violent, unhinged neighbor she'd been painting me as. So I stood there, fists clenched in my pockets, and did nothing. I just watched as our beautiful evening was murdered. One by one, my guests started to leave. They couldn't take it. The clash of sounds was physically painful. "I'm so sorry, Alex," one of them whispered, patting my shoulder as she left. The music died. Maria and Thomas packed up their instruments, their faces pale and defeated. The yard was empty again, the silence now filled only by the relentless, idiotic thumping from the car. Karen posted the video before the car's engine had even cooled. The caption read, "Our neighborhood maestro decided to start a war of the speakers tonight. So much for culture. This is just anarchy." The car finally sped off, leaving a trail of exhaust and humiliation. For a moment, there was just the ringing in my ears. Then, a different sound cut through the night, a siren, not loud, not urgent, but steadily approaching. A police cruiser pulled up to my curb, its blue and red lights painting my house in silent, flashing strokes of judgment. An officer got out, a young guy with a tired face. He'd clearly been called by Karen. He walked up to me, his hand resting on his belt. "Sir, we've had a complaint about a noise disturbance originating from this address." I just stared at him, exhausted. "The noise is gone," I said, my voice hollow. "I understand, sir," he said, pulling out a notepad, "but I still have to issue you a citation." He wrote it out, tore the sheet off, and handed it to me. Another fine. $250 for disturbing the peace. My own peace. I took the slip of paper. It felt cold, official. It wasn't the money that got to me. It wasn't even the injustice. It was the neat official stamp at the bottom, a tiny blue seal from the county that confirmed her narrative. In the eyes of the law, I was the problem. The police citation wasn't a piece of paper. It was a brand. Official proof that I was the villain in Karen's story. The fine from the Homeowners Association was now a staggering $7,500. I was hemorrhaging money, friends, and my own sanity. I spent the next few days in a fog of anger and helplessness, the thumping bass from that car a phantom echo in my head. I knew I was being played, but I couldn't see the whole board. Why was she so obsessed? It couldn't just be about control. People like Karen don't invest this much energy without a payoff at the end. I started digging, not into bylaws, but into her. Karen Davis, the realtor. Her agency's website was slick, full of smiling families and promises of community living at its finest. I spent hours scrolling through property records, sales histories, and county development plans. It felt like searching for a single black stone on a mile-long beach. Then I found him, or rather, he found me. I was sitting in my dark living room one evening, staring at a stack of bills I couldn't pay, when there was a quiet knock on my door. I almost didn't answer. I expected another citation, another angry neighbor. But when I looked through the peephole, I saw a familiar weathered face. It was Marcus, the old electrician from a few blocks over, the one who'd kept his hand down at the HOA meeting. I opened the door. He stood there on my porch, a thermos in one hand and a roll of old blueprints under his arm. He smelled faintly of sawdust and ozone. "Got a minute?" he asked, his voice a low rumble. "Figured you could use some coffee that doesn't taste like defeat." I let him in. He sat at my kitchen table like he owned the place and poured 2 cups of steaming black coffee. He didn't say anything for a long moment, just watched me with his sharp, intelligent eyes. He was in his 70s, with hands gnarled from a lifetime of twisting wires, but his mind was clearly still sharp as a tack. "She's not after your music, you know," he said finally, taking a sip. "She never is." "What do you mean?" "This neighborhood," he said, gesturing vaguely with his cup. "I wired most of these houses back in the 80s, knew every circuit, every transformer. A few years back, Karen strong-armed the community into selling off the old community garden. Said the soil was contaminated. Total nonsense. A month later, her cousin's development company tried to buy the land for a song to build condos. The story sounded sickeningly familiar. It was a pattern. Create a problem, stoke the fear, then offer a solution that benefits her. "So what's the problem this time?" I asked. "What's she after?" Marcus looked at me. "It's not what she's after. It's what she's hiding." He unrolled the old blueprints on my table. They were brittle, covered in faded blue lines and handwritten notes. He pointed to a section that showed the electrical layout for my block. "See this? This is the main transformer that feeds this whole cul-de-sac. It was barely adequate when we installed it 30 years ago. With all the new additions, the air conditioners, the electric cars, it's overloaded, dangerously so." A cold dread washed over me. "What does that have to do with my music nights?" "A dozen extra people in your yard? That's not the issue. It's the idea of them. A party, a gathering, anything that could put an unusual strain on the grid. Or worse, anything that could lead to an inspection. If a fire marshal ever did a real load test on this system, he'd shut it down. The mandatory upgrades would cost a fortune. It would kill property values. And it would expose the fact that her agency has been selling houses in this neighborhood without disclosing a major, dangerous infrastructure flaw." It all clicked into place. The noise, the parking, the bylaws. It was all a smokescreen, a brilliant, vicious misdirection. She wasn't trying to silence my music. She was trying to silence any activity, any gathering that might accidentally shine a light on her dirty secret. My small tribute to Leo was a threat, not because it was loud, but because it brought people together, and people, gathered together, might start asking questions. "During your last music night," Marcus said, his voice dropping lower, "did you notice the lights flicker?" I thought back. The memory was hazy, lost in the anger and humiliation. But then I remembered. Just before the car with the bass had shown up, the string lights I'd hung had dimmed for a second. A brief, almost imperceptible pulse. I'd chalked it up to a loose connection. "Yeah," I breathed. "They did." Marcus nodded slowly. "There's your proof. The system is unstable. A few more houses, a hot summer day with everyone running their AC, and this whole block could go dark, or worse." He tapped a gnarly finger on the blueprint. "She's not just a bully, Alex. She's a criminal, and you just stumbled right into the middle of her cover-up." The room was silent except for the hum of the refrigerator. The coffee in my cup had gone cold. I was no longer fighting a homeowners association president. I was fighting a cornered animal, one who had everything to lose. And I realized the game had just changed. The stakes weren't just my backyard anymore. It was the safety of the entire neighborhood. I looked at Marcus, at the faded blueprint spread across my table like a treasure map leading to hell. Hope is a funny thing. Sometimes it doesn't feel like a bright light. Sometimes it feels like the cold, hard weight of a weapon being placed in your hand. The blueprints on my table weren't just paper and ink. They were a battle plan. For the first time in weeks, I felt the fog of despair begin to lift, replaced by a cold, sharp clarity. Marcus's revelation gave me a target. I wasn't just defending my friend's memory anymore. I was on the offensive. But how do you fight a ghost? The electrical grid was a hidden enemy. I couldn't just point at a humming transformer and convince a mob of angry neighbors that their queen was a liar. I needed more than a theory. I needed irrefutable proof. My first thought was to go official. I found a young, hungry lawyer, fresh out of law school, who seemed eager to take on the homeowners association. His name was Ben, and he talked a big game about corporate malfeasance and citizens' rights. He drafted letters, filed motions. For a couple of weeks, it felt like progress. The fines were temporarily frozen pending a review. It was a small victory, but it tasted sweet. I allowed myself a sliver of hope. That hope was a mistake. Have you ever put your trust in someone, only to watch them sell you out for a better offer? The day of the big HOA review meeting, Ben called me. His voice was tight, uncomfortable. "Alex, listen, we have a problem." He explained that his firm's senior partners had just reviewed my case. And what a coincidence, Karen Davis's real estate agency was one of their biggest commercial clients. A clear conflict of interest. They were dropping me, effective immediately. "You can't do this, Ben," I pleaded, my voice tight with disbelief. "My hands are hair-tied, Alex. I'm sorry." He wasn't sorry. He was scared. He hung up. I walked into that meeting alone, a lamb walking back into the slaughterhouse. Karen was radiating triumph. She announced to the assembly that my own lawyer had abandoned my frivolous case. The room erupted in a low murmur of vindication. It was the nail in my coffin. She then made her final crushing move. "Given Mr. Ramirez's continued defiance and the legal consensus that his claims have no merit," she declared, her voice ringing with authority, "the board has voted to file a lawsuit against him. We are seeking a permanent injunction to ban any and all group events on his property, and we are suing for $50,000 in damages to the community's reputation and property values." $50,000. The number sucked the air out of my lungs. It was a death sentence. It would mean losing my house, losing everything. The room was spinning. I saw the faces of my neighbors, not with anger this time, but with a cold, detached pity. They had their villain, and now they were watching the final act. I stumbled out of that room, defeated. The war was over. I had lost. That night was the lowest I've ever been. I sat in the dark on my back patio, the legal papers on the table beside me, feeling the weight of absolute failure. I had fought, and I had been systematically, expertly crushed. Karen had outplayed me at every turn. She'd used the rules, the law, and the community itself as weapons, and she had dismantled my life, piece by piece. I thought about Leo. I'd wanted to honor him, but instead, I'd dragged his memory through this filthy fight and lost. The silence in the yard felt like an accusation. Just as I was about to give in to the despair, a small, quiet figure appeared at my gate. It was Jenna, the young woman who worked as a cashier at the local grocery store. She was one of the faces in the crowd at the meetings, always looking down, avoiding eye contact. She lived in one of the rental units at the edge of the neighborhood. She stood there nervously, twisting the hem of her jacket. "Mr. Ramirez," she whispered, "can I talk to you for a second?" I just nodded, too tired to even be surprised. She came and sat in the chair opposite me, keeping her distance. I was one of the people who signed the complaint against you," she said, her voice barely audible. "The first one." I didn't say anything. I just waited. "Karen, Mrs. Davis, she made me," Jenna blurted out, tears welling in her eyes. "My landlord is a company she has a deal with. She said if I didn't sign, they'd find a reason to raise my rent or not renew my lease. I have 2 kids. I couldn't risk it." She was terrified, but she was there. She was doing the one thing no one else had dared to do. She was telling the truth. "She does it to all the renters," Jenna continued, her voice gaining a bit of strength. "Uses us for votes, for signatures. We're trapped." She looked at me, her eyes pleading. "But this lawsuit, it's wrong. It's not about noise. She's terrified of something else." Then she pulled out her phone. She sent an email to another board member a few weeks ago. She thought she was being clever, but she sent it to the wrong Jen. She showed me the screen. It was an email from Karen. The subject line was the R problem. The body was short and cryptic. The gatherings are a liability. If any one official starts poking around because of a crowd, our whole electrical liability shield could collapse. We need to shut him down permanently before the summer heat puts the grid to the test. My heart stopped. It was there, in writing. Not enough for a court, maybe. It was circumstantial, jargon-filled. But it was the missing piece. It was the motive, straight from the dragon's mouth. It was proof that this was all a cover-up. I looked from the phone screen to Jenna's frightened, determined face. She had just handed me a loaded gun. She had risked everything to do it. The despair that had been choking me for days finally broke. It was replaced by a surge of pure, cold rage. A rage that felt like fuel. Karen thought she had won. She thought she had buried me under a mountain of lawsuits and public shame. But you know what they say about burying things. You better make sure they're actually dead, because sometimes you just end up planting a seed. That email wasn't a silver bullet, but it was gunpowder. It was confirmation. A signpost pointing directly at Karen's deepest fear. The word liability was the key. Her entire house of cards was built on avoiding that one single word. But how do you make an invisible threat visible? How do you show a danger that people can't see, smell, or touch? I sat there with Marcus for hours, the blueprint spread out under a single dim lamp. Jenna's email glowing on my phone like a holy relic. We went over every circuit, every junction box. And then Marcus pointed to a detail on the 30-year-old schematic. There, he said, that's her weak spot. He was pointing to the main power feed for a new upscale mini mansion being built at the end of the cul-de-sac. It was Karen's crown jewel, her showcase property, listed for an obscene amount of money. To get this place approved, Marcus explained, they had to file a new utility plan with the county, and in that plan, they had to swear that the existing grid could handle the additional load. But it can't, I said. Exactly, Marcus grinned, a rare sight. They lied on a permit application. That's not just an HOA violation, that's fraud. But a fraudulent document is still just a piece of paper. It wouldn't sway the neighbors. It wouldn't stop the lawsuit. I needed something more. I needed a live demonstration. I needed to make the invisible visible. That's when the idea hit me. It was crazy. It was theatrical. It was exactly the kind of move Leo would have loved. I went back to my roots, back to my years as a sound engineer on tour with rock bands. I knew acoustics, but I also knew electricity. I knew how to measure power draws, how to calculate loads, how to push a system right to its breaking point without blowing it up. My old sound meter was broken, but I had other tools. Professional tools. I spent 2 days in my garage, tinkering, soldering, building. I was creating my own weapon, not a bomb, but a truth machine. Then I made the calls. I started with Maria, the cellist. I need you to do something for me, I said. I need you to call every musician you know, every string player, every horn player, every percussionist in this city who's ever been screwed over by a venue owner or a bully. What are you planning, Alex? She asked, a nervous excitement in her voice. I'm planning a concert, I said. A real one. I'm inviting the local Symphony. The response was overwhelming. It turned out Leo wasn't the only one who'd been crushed by the system. My story, which had been spreading through the local arts community, resonated. Musicians were hungry for a chance to fight back. They didn't just agree to play, they volunteered, for free, in memory of Leo and all the others like him. Next, I went public. I created a social media event page. A night of symphony, a tribute to community and the arts. I didn't mention Karen. I didn't mention the lawsuit or the fines. The description was simple. In a world that increasingly tries to silence us, let's make some beautiful noise. A free one-night-only performance by the Oak Ridge Community Symphony. I made the tickets free, but required online registration. The event exploded. It was shared hundreds, then thousands of times. People were tired of the negativity, of the division. The idea of a free symphony concert in a neighborhood backyard was a beautiful, defiant act they could rally behind. The 200 tickets were gone in an hour. A waiting list started to form. Karen was furious. She sent me cease and desist letters daily. She called the police chief, the mayor. But I was breaking no laws. A free private event on my own property with a registered guest list was perfectly legal. She had built her prison of bylaws, and I had found the one door she'd forgotten to lock. The final piece of the puzzle fell into place 2 days before the show. An official-looking envelope appeared in my mailbox. It was from Karen's real estate agency. It was an invitation. She was hosting a big pre-sale champagne reception for potential buyers of her new mini-mansion on the exact same night as my concert. It was a power move, designed to draw the neighborhood's elite away from my disruptive event. She was creating a clear social dividing line. You could go to her classy exclusive party with the rich folks, or you could go to my noisy rabble-rousing with the artists. I looked at the invitation, at the glossy picture of the oversized house she was so proud of, and I smiled. She had no idea what was coming. She thought she was setting a trap for me. She didn't realize she had just walked right into mine. The night of the concert felt like the air before a lightning strike, charged, trembling, and full of ozone. My backyard was transformed. A small raised stage stood where the fire pit usually was. Dozens of chairs were neatly arranged on the lawn, but the real action was happening behind the scenes. Marcus and I had spent the afternoon running discrete cables, connecting my custom-built power monitoring system to a large display screen I'd hidden behind a retractable projector screen on my patio. As dusk settled, 2 different worlds came to life. On my side of the fence, a quiet, expectant crowd gathered. The musicians of the Oak Ridge Community Symphony warmed up, the air filled with the beautiful chaos of tuning strings and warming brass. It was a crowd of artists, students, and families, the heart of the community Karen despised. On the other side, at the mini-mansion, the party was in full swing. We could hear the polite tinkle of champagne glasses and the low murmur of moneyed conversation. Karen was gliding through her guests, a vision in a white dress, the queen in her castle. She'd occasionally cast a disdainful glance over the fence, a smirk playing on her lips. She thought she had already won the battle for the neighborhood's soul. The conductor, an old friend of Leo's, raised his baton. A hush fell over my yard. He looked at me, and I gave him a subtle nod. The show was on. They started with something soft, a gentle adagio that floated over the neighborhood like a prayer. It was beautiful, but it was just the opening act. As they transitioned into the second piece, a powerful, brass-heavy overture, I discreetly flipped a switch on my control panel. On the other side of the yard, my monitoring system began to draw a tiny, almost imperceptible amount of extra power from the grid, mimicking the load of a few extra appliances, a house full of people. On the big screen, only Marcus and I could see. A red line representing the grid's load began to creep upward. Then came the crescendo. The plan was for the full orchestra, 60 musicians, to hit the loudest, most power-hungry part of the symphony all at once. The conductor caught my eye again. It was time. He raised his arms, the orchestra took a collective breath, and then it happened. A wave of sound, a tidal wave of brass and strings and percussion, crashed over the neighborhood. It was glorious. It was defiant. It was magnificent. And at that exact moment, across the street, the lights in Karen's multi-million-dollar mansion flickered. Once, twice, and then went out. A collective gasp went through her party. The tinkling laughter was replaced by confused murmurs. The darkness wasn't just in her house. It spread. Streetlight after streetlight blinked off. One by one, the houses on our block were plunged into a sudden, shocking silence. Our entire section of the grid had collapsed under the strain. But my yard was still lit. Because, as Marcus had pointed out from the blueprints, my house was on the edge of the circuit, drawing power from a different, more stable line. We were an island of light in a sea of darkness. The orchestra, illuminated by my battery-powered stage lights, faltered and then stopped. Into the profound silence, I stepped onto the stage, a microphone in my hand. I hit a button, and the hidden projector screen behind me retracted, revealing the large monitor. On it, a graph showed a jagged red line, spiking dramatically and then flatlining. "Good evening, everyone," I said, my voice calm and clear, amplified just enough to carry across the yards. "For those of you visiting from Mrs. Davis's party, welcome. Please, don't be alarmed. This wasn't an accident." Heads turned. Karen's guests, holding their cell phones like candles, drifted toward the fence, drawn by the light and my voice. Karen stood frozen on her porch, her face a mask of disbelief. "For months," I continued, Our homeowners association president has told you that my music is a nuisance, a danger. The truth is, she's been terrified of something else entirely. I pointed to the graph. This is a live reading of our neighborhood's electrical grid. That final spike, that was the beautiful music you just heard, but it wasn't the music that caused this blackout. The music was just the straw that broke the camel's back, a back that was already broken by greed and negligence. Marcus stepped up beside me, a second microphone in his hand. He explained in simple, clear terms how the grid was overloaded, how it was a fire hazard. He held up the fraudulent permit application for Karen's new mansion. "They lied," he said, his voice echoing in the darkness. "They put every one of you at risk to make a profit." A woman from Karen's party shouted, "I was about to buy a house here. Did you know about this?" she asked, pointing a diamond-ringed finger at Karen. The crowd turned on her. The whispers became angry accusations. The trap had sprung. She was surrounded by the very people she'd been trying to impress, their faces illuminated by the cold, hard light of my stage. It was over. The next day, the county launched a full-scale investigation. The insurance company for the HOA pulled their coverage pending the results. The $50,000 lawsuit against me was dropped so fast, it probably broke the sound barrier. Karen's real estate license was suspended, and she and her cousin's development company were buried in lawsuits from homeowners. I won, but, victory isn't always clean. The music nights continued, bigger and more popular than ever. They became an official town event. But that quiet, intimate vigil for my friend, that was gone. It now belonged to everyone. My private little sanctuary had become a public stage. Sometimes I still sit out here alone, long after the crowds have gone home. I hold Leo's old sound meter, the one with the cracked glass. I never fixed it. It reminds me that sometimes, to honor something beautiful, you have to be willing to get broken. You have to be willing to make some noise, even if it costs you your peace and quiet. You ever feel like you're fighting a battle that's bigger than you? Let me know in the comments. And if you believe that sometimes you have to get loud to be heard, smash that like button. It helps more than you know.